The first shot wasn't fired by the aliens, it was us. And that's why they were terrified. Aeliana Voss stood at the helm of the Vanguard, watching the alien fleet approach from her command chair. The massive ships, lined up in precise formation, blocked out the stars, casting a long shadow over the last remnants of human civilization. The Malak'Ra, their invaders, had come with no illusions about their victory. They believed Earth's fate had already been sealed. But they were wrong. Target locked. Jax's voice echoed through the comms, breaking her focus. His words were measured, but she knew the weight behind them. Ready to fire on your command, Captain? Aeliana's fingers tightened around the armrests of her chair as she studied the tactical display. The Vanguard was one of humanity's last standing warships, its hull scarred from previous skirmishes, but still standing tall. Behind her, the rest of the Resistance fleet, a ragtag collection of hastily repaired ships, awaited their orders. She'd spent years preparing for this moment, strategizing every move in her mind until there was nothing left to think about except the first strike. The Malak'Ra had underestimated humanity, again. Aeliana exhaled slowly, her pulse steadying. Fire! The ship's weapons systems hummed to life, and a bright flash streaked out of the Vanguard. A missile, loaded with the last of Earth's most advanced weaponry, shot toward the lead Malak'Ra flagship, the Zivathar. The tension in the air was palpable, and in the stillness, Aeliana couldn't help but hold her breath. For a brief moment, time seemed to stretch, the missile's path slow and deliberate. Then, the explosion. The Zivathar shuddered as the missile collided, the shockwave rippling through the alien vessel. The flagship's shields buckled under the force of the blast, then exploded outward in a brilliant burst of flame and metal. Aeliana felt a spark of hope flare within her. The Malak'Ra had thought they could destroy humanity without consequence. They'd underestimated the resilience of her people. But the victory was short-lived. Captain, the Malak'Ra fleet is responding. Multiple incoming warships. Jax's voice snapped her back to reality. They're launching a counterattack. Aeliana's jaw clenched. The Zivathar might have fallen, but this battle was far from over. The Malak'Ra would regroup quickly. They always did. Divert all power to shields, Aeliana ordered, rising from her chair. The Vanguard shook as enemy fire rained down on them. We need to hit them while they're disoriented. Focus all remaining fire on their command vessels. They're vulnerable. The crew scrambled to carry out her commands. Outside the ship, explosions rang out as the Resistance fleet launched into action, a swarm of fighters and smaller ships taking on the Malak'Ra in a desperate gambit. Their odds weren't good, but they didn't have a choice. Aeliana knew this was the only chance humanity had to push back, to survive. But even as they fought, she couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that the Malak'Ra had something bigger in play. They always did. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos. Alarms blared across the Vanguard, and Aeliana's stomach twisted as the incoming fire grew heavier. The Resistance fleet was holding their own, but the Malak'Ra were relentless. The alien warships were sophisticated, their weapons overwhelming in scale. Still, humanity had one thing the Malak'Ra didn't: unpredictability. Captain, shields are holding at 60%. We can't take much more of this, the chief engineer reported, his voice tight with urgency. We've lost 2 of our rear batteries. Aeliana's fists clenched. They needed to end this quickly. Set the course. All ships, coordinate your fire on the Zaltar, their secondary command ship. If we take out their leadership, they'll crumble. Jax's voice came over her comms again, this time with a trace of concern. Captain, the Zaltar is heavily fortified. A direct assault could cost us everything. I didn't ask for your opinion. Aeliana shot back, her voice cold. The thought of losing humanity's last chance to a calculated retreat was unbearable. We don't have a choice. We strike now or lose everything. As the fleet pressed forward, Aeliana felt the strain of command weigh heavier with each passing second. Her ship shuddered again as another blast hit them, this one far closer than she liked. Report, she demanded, her gaze fixed on the display in front of her. Direct hit on the starboard side, Captain. Hull integrity at 50%. the officer said, her voice laced with concern. We've got fires in engineering and critical damage to the engine room. Damn it, Aeliana muttered under her breath. They couldn't afford to take another hit. Not with their fate hanging in the balance. They had no time to repair, only to fight. Jax, how long until we can launch another strike? She asked, trying to focus on their next move. 30 seconds. We're patching up the targeting systems, but it's not going to be perfect, he replied, sounding more strained with each word. Aeliana gritted her teeth. There was no time for perfection. This was a battle of survival, not one of finesse. Launch the strike, now! The missile pods fired in rapid succession, the Vanguard's guns screaming into the void. Aeliana watched as the missiles surged forward, cutting through the debris and the wreckage of the battle. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually succeed. But then, everything changed. Captain? Jax's voice cracked through the comms, raw with panic. They've activated something. It's the weapon, and it's heading straight for Earth. They're going to obliterate the planet. Aeliana froze, the blood draining from her face. The last thing she had wanted to hear. Humanity's future was in even more jeopardy than she thought. A weapon that could destroy Earth in an instant would seal their fate for good. Not on my watch, she muttered fiercely. She turned toward the crew. All ships, we need to move to intercept the weapon. Now! There was no hesitation. The crew worked in unison, driven by the same desire, to protect their home. But as the Vanguard's engines roared to life, hurtling toward the heart of the battle, a new transmission flashed across Aeliana's console. It was a message from the Malak'Ra Supreme Council. You've made your move, Captain, a voice, cold and unmistakable, said. But the test has just begun. You won't be allowed to live, let alone save your world. Aeliana's stomach twisted. They had been playing a game all along, one she hadn't fully understood. The Malak'Ra hadn't come for conquest. They'd come for something far darker, something that could break humanity once and for all. The weapon wasn't just to destroy Earth, it was a message. And they had just stepped into the trap. Cliffhanger ending asterisk. Before Aeliana could react, the massive alien ship Zaltar opened fire, unleashing a barrage of destructive energy toward Earth. Aeliana's hands gripped the console as the blast came closer, the trajectory set, and all she could do was watch. Brace for impact, she said, her voice a whisper in the chaos. And then, nothing. The universe fell into silence. The bridge of the Vanguard was a cacophony of urgent voices, flashing screens, and the distant sound of explosions from outside the ship. The crew had seen countless battles, but this one was different. This one felt like the final stand, the last desperate fight for a future they might never see. Aeliana stood at the center of it all, eyes locked on the screen before her. The Malak'Ra fleet was regrouping, and humanity was at the edge of annihilation. We've got 5 minutes, Captain. Jax's voice was tight with strain, coming through the comms from his station. Their reinforcements are almost here. If we don't act now, we'll be trapped. Aeliana's mind raced, calculations and contingencies flashing through her thoughts. She had already committed humanity to this strike. If they failed, Earth would fall. If they succeeded, they might buy themselves a few more hours, maybe days, before the Malak'Ra could adapt. Prepare the fleet for another strike, Aeliana said, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her mind. Focus fire on the Zaltar. We cripple their secondary command ship, and their leadership will falter. We're cutting off the head. Jax's voice was unwavering. Got it, Captain? All ships are ready. We'll hit them where it hurts. Her eyes scanned the displays, watching as humanity's fighters began to form up for the attack. She felt a pang of something, relief, pride, fear, ripple through her. The fleet was ragtag, cobbled together from scattered colonies and civilian ships, but it was the last thing standing between Earth and total destruction. Incoming fire! The weapons officer shouted. The Vanguard shuddered as the first volley from the Malak'Ra fleet collided with their shields. Sparks exploded along the walls, but the ship held. Barely. Aeliana felt the familiar sensation of pressure tightening in her chest. The weight of command was always there, but tonight, it felt heavier than ever. Shields holding at 75%, the officer reported, but Aeliana knew that wouldn't last long. Hold position, she commanded. We push forward when they reload. Her eyes shifted to the starboard display, watching the rest of the resistance ships maneuvering into position. They had one shot at this. If they didn't make it count, it would all be over. Captain, Jax's voice crackled again. I've got a message coming through from their command center. It's encrypted, but we're picking up part of it. Aeliana's brows furrowed. A message? From the Malak'Ra? She had expected their retaliation, but not this. Something felt off. Put it through, she ordered. The transmission came through loud and clear, cutting through the chaos of the battlefield. A chillingly calm voice filled the room, one she didn't recognize. A male voice, with an almost clinical edge. Captain Voss, I must admit I'm impressed. The voice began, unbothered by the destruction outside. Your tactics are bold, even if they are futile. You've broken our flagship, but that only makes the game more interesting. Aeliana's blood ran cold. Who is this? She demanded, her voice betraying nothing of the fear welling up inside her. The voice chuckled softly. My name is Tariq. I am the supreme strategist of the Malak'Ra fleet. You've done well to survive this long, but now, you've entered the lion's den. I hope you're ready for the test. The transmission cut off, leaving Aeliana in stunned silence. The weight of his words crashed over her like a wave. The Malak'Ra were playing with them. No, they were testing them. This wasn't just a war of conquest. It was something far darker. Captain, Jax said, his voice far more urgent now. I've analyzed the message. Tariq's a tactical genius. He's probably 2 steps ahead of us already. Aeliana's mind snapped back into focus. No time for hesitation. No time for doubt. Bring up their fleet's formation, she commanded, striding toward the tactical map. The map appeared on the screen before her, showing the alien fleet's movement. They were organizing into a compact, impenetrable formation around the Zaltar. But there was something else, something hidden at the core of their strategy. Jax, she muttered, her fingers hovering over the controls. What's that? That fleet structure doesn't look like a standard defensive pattern. They're setting up a trap. Jax didn't respond immediately, his eyes scanning through the fleet's data. You're right. That formation's designed to funnel us into a kill zone. If we engage the Zaltar directly, we'll be surrounded. Aeliana's mind raced. She knew the Malak'Ra too well. If they thought humanity would fall into the same predictable patterns, they'd make sure to expose their weaknesses. But they had one advantage: unpredictability. We can't go straight at them, she said, thinking quickly. We need to hit their weaker ships first. Divide their forces. It's the only way. Jax's voice was filled with renewed resolve. Understood. Recalculating attack vectors now. Aeliana turned back to the crew, watching as they worked in perfect synchrony. Their lives depended on every decision made in the next few moments. There was no room for mistakes. All ships, execute the new strike plan, she ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. Hit their support ships, break their formation. The fleet shifted immediately, their ships splitting off into smaller squadrons. The coordinated attack was like a dance, fast, fluid, and sharp. Explosions ripped through the Malak'Ra lines as the resistance fighters tore into their weaker ships. It was the chaos they needed. The Malak'Ra were scrambling now, trying to reorganize in the face of an attack they hadn't expected. Captain, their defenses are collapsing, Jax reported. The Zaltar is isolating itself. We've got an opening. Aeliana's pulse quickened, but she knew it wasn't over yet. The Zaltar was the key. If they could take it down, they could cripple the Malak'Ra's command structure. Set course for the Zaltar, Aeliana ordered. All ships follow the plan. Keep the pressure on them. We take down their flagship, now. The vanguard surged forward, cutting through the remnants of the Malak'Ra's shattered fleet. The Zaltar loomed in front of them, a monolith of alien power, but Aeliana didn't hesitate. "Prepare all weapons for the final assault," she said, gripping the armrests of her chair. "This ends now." The vanguard opened fire, its weapons tearing through the Zaltar's shields. But just as they closed in for the kill shot, a new transmission came through. This one was different. It was urgent. "Captain Voss," Jack said, his voice laced with panic. "You need to see this." The screen flickered to life, showing a new figure, one Aeliana recognized all too well. A familiar face, her old comrade, now turned enemy. "Zal," she whispered. "What the hell is he doing on that ship?" The traitor smiled through the screen, his eyes cold and mocking. "You may have breached our fleet, Captain." Zal's voice was dripping with contempt. "But the test has only just begun." Cliffhanger ending asterisk. The screen flickered again, and the entire bridge shook as the Zaltar's guns powered up. Aeliana's eyes widened in horror as the weapon locked onto Earth. "Captain?" Jax shouted. "They've locked onto Earth's coordinates." "No!" Aeliana's heart sank as she realized what was happening. "They're not just going to destroy the fleet, they're going for Earth." Zal's face filled the screen once more. "Welcome to the final stage of the test, Captain," he said, his grin wide, filled with malicious satisfaction. And then, everything went dark. Aeliana's heart pounded as she stared at the screen in disbelief. The Zaltar's guns had locked onto Earth, its colossal, weaponized array primed for destruction. The cold, mocking voice of Zal rang in her ears like a hammering drum, its cruel certainty reverberating through the bridge. "Captain!" Jax's voice cut through the haze of shock. "They're about to fire. We don't have much time." The words barely registered in Aeliana's mind as her thoughts spiraled. She had known it wasn't going to be easy. The Malak'Ra had been testing them, trying to crush their resolve at every turn, but this was worse. Zal had always been a step ahead, and now, with Earth in his crosshairs, the test had escalated into something far more dangerous. "We've got to stop them. Now!" Aeliana snapped, the weight of command settling back onto her shoulders. "Jax, I need options. What are we dealing with?" Jax's hands flew over the console. His face was a picture of concentration, his brows furrowed in frustration. "The Zaltar is shielded and heavily reinforced. It's designed to withstand a direct assault. We can't break through its shields with conventional firepower, Captain. But there's one chance. We can overload their weapons targeting system." "Overload it how?" Aeliana asked, a spark of hope rising in her chest. "If we can get close enough, we can hack into their systems and force a feedback loop," Jax explained quickly. "But it's going to be dangerous. If we get it wrong, they'll fire on us before we even get a chance." Aeliana turned toward the tactical map, her eyes scanning the trajectory of the Zaltar's weapon. There was a narrow window, a sliver of a chance, and it was all they had left. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Earth's fate was on the line. "We do it," Aeliana said, her voice firm. "Prepare the fleet to engage. We'll get close enough to disable their targeting system. Everyone else, cover us while we make our move." Jax gave a brief nod, his fingers moving with speed and precision. "Aye, Captain. They won't see us coming." The vanguard surged forward, cutting through the chaos of the battlefield as the fleet followed suit. Aeliana's fingers tightened on the console, her breath steadying as she watched their ship close in on the Zaltar. The alien flagship loomed larger with every passing second, its terrifying array of weapons primed and ready. The Malak'Ra had been waiting for this final strike, and Aeliana had no illusions about what would happen if they failed. "Fire support, now!" Aeliana shouted, her eyes locked on the targeting system. The resistance ships poured in, launching missile after missile to draw the Malak'Ra's fire, but Aeliana knew that it was only a distraction. They were never going to take down the Zaltar with raw power alone. The vanguard was close now, too close, but it was their only chance. The ship rattled under the barrage of enemy fire, the shields flickering dangerously as their proximity to the enemy ship increased. Aeliana's heart skipped a beat as the timer on the ship's navigation system counted down to the final seconds. 30 seconds to target acquisition, the weapons officer reported. We're almost there. Aeliana's eyes narrowed. The Zaltar's weapon systems were almost primed. Once it fired, nothing on Earth would survive. Jax, do it now, she barked. Jax's voice was tight with focus. Hacking now. I've got a connection, the system is resisting. Aeliana's stomach twisted as she saw the weapons array power up. Do it, Jax! The countdown on the screen accelerated. In one last desperate move, Aeliana slammed her fist down on the console, commanding everything she had to be thrown into this single attack. Just as the Zaltar's weapon fired, Jax shouted. Done! I've overridden the targeting system. The blast will backfire. Aeliana didn't breathe. The explosion from the Zaltar was nearly instantaneous, but instead of a directed beam of energy, a massive surge of feedback erupted from the weapon's core. For a split second, it seemed like time itself stopped. And then the Zaltar exploded. The shockwave hit them moments later, sending the Vanguard reeling through space. Alarms blared as the ship rocked violently, but Aeliana held on, her eyes fixed on the decimated remains of the flagship. The mighty Zaltar had crumbled in seconds, its core ruptured by its own weapon. Aeliana's breath came in ragged gasps. They had done it. They had won. But the victory felt hollow. The Zaltar was gone, but the Malak'Ra were far from defeated. Aeliana knew that whatever happened next, this battle wasn't over. This was only one piece of the puzzle. She couldn't afford to get comfortable, not yet. Report! Aeliana barked, trying to shake off the lingering effects of the explosion. Sir, the Zaltar is down, the communications officer said, her voice shaky but filled with relief. But the fleet is regrouping. They're not giving up. The words sank in. There was no time to celebrate. They'd just taken down the Malak'Ra's flagship, but the rest of their fleet was still a threat. The tide of battle had turned, but the war? The war was far from over. Ready the remaining ships, Aeliana ordered. We're not done here. We push forward. The fleet reformed quickly, taking advantage of the chaos to strike at the Malak'Ra's weakened vessels. The resistance was moving faster now, capitalizing on the confusion caused by the loss of the Zaltar. But even as the fight intensified, Aeliana couldn't shake the growing feeling that they were on the brink of something far darker. Captain! Jax's voice cracked over the comms, and Aeliana could hear the tension in his words. You need to see this. Aeliana's stomach dropped. What is it? I've been intercepting Malak'Ra communications, Jax said. They're saying something about a backup plan. A weapon they've been hiding. They call it the Purge. Aeliana's mind raced. Another weapon? The Malak'Ra had already demonstrated their ability to bring down entire worlds with ease, but this? This sounded like something far worse. Where is it? She asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. I don't know yet, Jax admitted, his voice grim. But I'm digging. They'll try to activate it soon, and if they do, we won't be able to stop it. Aeliana's eyes narrowed as the weight of the situation sank in. The battle had just escalated to something unimaginable. The Malak'Ra weren't just fighting for dominance, they were fighting for total annihilation. We find the Purge, Aeliana said, the finality in her tone marking the beginning of the next phase of the war. And we stop it. Cliffhanger ending asterisk. Before Aeliana could react, the comms lit up again. The voice that came through was calm, almost eerily so. Captain Voss, the voice said, cold and filled with malicious amusement. You may have destroyed the Zaltar, but now the real test begins. Welcome to the end. Aeliana's blood ran cold as the screen flickered to life, showing an image of a massive, heavily shielded structure, the final piece of the Malak'Ra's weapon. And she realized with a sinking heart, the Purge was not a weapon at all. It was something far worse. The Vanguard hummed with life as Aeliana stood at the center of the bridge, watching the aftermath of the battle unfold. The crew had fought valiantly, but now, as they regrouped after the destruction of the Zaltar, There was an undeniable sense of tension in the air. The Malak'Ra had just suffered a crushing blow, but the war wasn't over. Aeliana could feel the weight of that truth pressing down on her, especially as she heard the voice that had chilled her to the bone. Captain Voss? The voice on the comms crackled with a cold, twisted amusement. You may have destroyed the Zaltar, but now the real test begins. Welcome to the end. Aeliana's pulse quickened, her hand gripping the console as she locked eyes with her team. They had been bracing for retaliation, but the words sent a ripple of uncertainty through the room. The Malak'Ra had been ruthless from the start, but this felt different. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. This wasn't just about defeating an alien fleet, it was about something far darker. Who is this? Aeliana demanded, her voice steady despite the growing unease. The comms buzzed again before the voice responded. Ah, Captain Voss. You've killed so many of my brothers, my fleet, my Zaltar. But you still don't understand. You've been dancing on the edge of a blade. You just haven't seen it yet. Aeliana's fingers tightened on the console, and she forced herself to remain calm. Her mind was racing. The end, what was he talking about? Enough with the cryptic nonsense, she said. Tell me what you've got left, and we'll end this now. The voice laughed. It wasn't the laughter of someone amused. It was the cold, calculating laugh of someone who already knew the endgame. You've fought bravely, Captain, but you're too late. My forces are already mobilizing the last piece of the puzzle. You've come far, but now the real weapon is in play. Before Aeliana could respond, the transmission cut off, leaving her standing in the thick silence. The calm had settled over her like a heavy fog, and she could see the worry etched on the faces of her crew. They had just crushed the flagship of the Malak'Ra, but it felt like nothing had been solved. The voice was right. There was something bigger at play here. Something more terrifying than they could imagine. Jax, Aeliana said, turning toward her strategist. His face was already filled with concern. What do we know about their backup plan? Jax's eyes scanned the data streaming across his console. I've been pulling everything I can, Captain. The Purges, if that's what this is, are being activated across several key systems. It's a multi-phase weapon, designed not just for destruction, but to destabilize the galaxy's ecosystem. They want to tear apart everything. Aeliana's stomach turned. Stabilize? What do you mean? Jax looked grim. It's not just about killing. This weapon targets the core of planetary ecosystems, everything from agriculture to atmosphere, creating a chain reaction that leads to global collapse. It's not just a bomb. It's a disaster for the entire system. Aeliana's heart sank. They're planning to wipe us out and destroy everything we depend on to survive. Jax nodded. Exactly. Aeliana stared at the screen, processing the horrifying revelation. The Malak'Ra hadn't just been trying to conquer Earth. They were trying to ensure that nothing would survive. If they succeeded, humanity wouldn't just be wiped off the map, they'd be erased from the very fabric of existence. Everything would collapse under the weight of the chaos they'd unleashed. How long do we have? Aeliana asked, her voice barely a whisper. We don't know, Jax replied. But we have to assume they're launching the Purge as we speak. We're talking about planetary-scale devastation. Aeliana clenched her fists. The stakes had never been higher. The Malak'Ra were no longer just enemies. They were a force of destruction, one that didn't stop at victory. They sought to obliterate everything in their wake. All right, she said, her voice steely. We stop them here. We don't have a choice. Jax met her gaze. I'll work on a countermeasure, but if they've integrated the Purge into their fleet's core system, it'll be difficult to disable in time. Then we do what we do best, Aeliana said, her tone firm. We get in close. We break their system from the inside. The Vanguard was already en route to the heart of the Malak'Ra fleet. Their ships had taken heavy losses, but Aeliana had never been one to back down. The Vanguard's engines roared as they powered toward the heart of the Malak'Ra's remaining forces. Captain, Jax called from his console, his voice strained. I've located the central command hub. It's heavily protected, but we can breach it if we disable their outer shields. Aeliana's eyes narrowed. Then we disable them. The final phase of their plan was set. The Resistance fighters would form the vanguard, providing cover for the vanguard as it moved closer to the enemy fleet's core. The team would infiltrate the command center, disable the primary system, and stop the purge before it could take effect. The crew went silent as they prepared for the final assault. Aeliana stood at the helm, hands clenched around the controls. They were mere minutes away from the heart of the Malak'Ra fleet. Everything they had fought for, every loss, every sacrifice, had led to this moment. The pressure weighed on her, but it didn't break her. She couldn't afford to think of anything other than success. Earth's survival depended on it. As the vanguard cut through the Malak'Ra defenses, enemy ships swarmed them, firing relentless volleys of plasma and energy blasts. The vanguard's shields flickered under the onslaught, but it held together, roaring forward like a beast fighting for its life. "Prepare for boarding," Aeliana barked, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at the breach point ahead. The inner sanctum of the Malak'Ra's fleet was a fortress. It was made to be impenetrable, designed to keep out anything that could harm their final weapon. But Aeliana had spent years studying their tactics. She had learned how to predict their moves, how to exploit their weaknesses. "Ready, Captain," Jack said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "No," Aeliana ordered. The vanguard crashed through the outer shields of the Malak'Ra flagship, sending debris flying in all directions. The crew braced for impact as the final boarding teams prepared to enter the command center. Inside the enemy's heart, the Resistance fought with ferocity, but the stakes had never been higher. Aeliana's heart raced as they reached the control room, only to find it empty, eerily quiet, save for the blinking lights of alien machinery. "They're waiting for us," Aeliana muttered under her breath. Just then, a low hum filled the room. The walls began to vibrate, and the sound of a low, eerie voice echoed through the comms. "You're too late, Captain." The voice of Tariq, the Malak'Ra supreme strategist, came through the speakers. "You've defeated our fleet, but now you'll see true devastation. The Purge is already in motion. Earth's fate is sealed." Aeliana's stomach turned. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Cliffhanger ending asterisk. Just as Aeliana moved to engage the system, a massive explosion ripped through the station. The lights flickered as alarms blared across the ship. Aeliana's eyes widened as a new, unanticipated force emerged from the shadows. "Captain, it's not over. They've initiated the purge." And Aeliana realized, with a sinking heart, the real fight had just begun.